Hi, Glenys.
Hey, Aaron. What do you want to talk about today?
How much I hate diets.
Yeah, diets suck.
So what do you do instead of a diet?
Intuitive eating. Health at every size.
So how many times have you had to explain intuitive eating and health at every size to someone?
Like 5,000 times. But that was just to my doctor.
Okay, so how many times have you explained it to someone and then they said, but diets are the only thing I know?
That's like every time. Can we pursue health without thinking about weight?
Yes, we can pursue health without thinking about weight.
That's pretty revolutionary, what you just said. But what if you just don't like yourself at the size that you're at?
I think we need to understand why, instead of just saying I need to change.
So, what's the deal with body positivity?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'm Aaron Flores.
And I'm Glenys Oyston. And we are Dietitians Unplugged. Happy New Year and Happy New Decade, everybody. We are back with another episode. And Aaron, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. It's good to be back going strong.
And we are so excited for this first episode of the new year.
We're kicking it off with a bang.
We are. We are talking to Christie Harrison.
Who?
The best. Christie Harrison.
Never heard
the
of
best
her.
Voice in podcasting. Registered dietitian, Food Psych podcast, and now out with a new book. And we have just been, I've been waiting for this episode to happen forever. Like, Christy, when's the book coming out? When's the book coming out? Okay, let's time it for when, you can be on the podcast. And so I'm super excited to have her on. She's just been, such a friend and mentor over the years. And I was on her podcast years ago, and you've been on twice, right? You're like the two-time rock star.
I'm a returning guest, yeah.
You're like, it's like on Saturday Night Live.
The five-time club.
The 5-time club? Yeah. So once you get on, we'll make it 3 times for Christie's podcast.
Yeah,
you get a jacket.
I get a special
smoking
key,
jacket.
special key to the room, right? Special room, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So you're well on your way. Let me just read her bio. So in case there's anybody out there who hasn't heard of Christie Harrison, and I'm not sure there is, but just in case there is, Christie Harrison is an anti-diet registered dietitian nutritionist, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating. She offers online courses and private intuitive eating coaching to help people all over the world make peace with food and their bodies. Since 2013, Christie has hosted Food Psych, a weekly podcast exploring people's relationships with food and paths to body liberation. It is now one of iTunes' top 100 health podcasts, reaching tens of thousands of listeners worldwide each week. Christie began her career in 2003 as a journalist covering food, nutrition, and health, and she's written for major publications including The New York Times, Self, BuzzFeed, Refinery 29, Gourmet, Slate, The Food Network, and many others. And you can learn more about Christie at her website, ChristieHarrison.com. We'll post that in the show notes. But basically, she is a rock star of the health at every size world. And she's got this hot new book out, Anti-Diet, which I ripped through immediately. And bonus, we're both in it.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, we're in a book, Aaron.
I know. And yeah, I mean, and well mentioned, not just
not just a toss-off.
Yeah, not, I don't know what that is, but it doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I don't either. So, I don't either. I just made that up. Just tossed off. No, I think we're in the index and everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are thrilled to be in a book about anti-diet.
Right.
And health at every size.
Yeah.
And I feel like now I don't have to write a book.
just read Christie's. Right.
Just read Christie's. So, yeah. And so before we get to that, just anything, new going on with you in the new year?
Yeah. I'm launching another 6-week men's group that is going to start on January 28th. So if you're interested, just shoot me an email at aaronfloresrdn@gmail.com and I will get back to you. And I am looking forward to, doing another round of these groups and hopefully trying to make it into a more like long-term group over time. So we'll see. But
and we'll put the link in the show notes for that too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm working on coming close to launching Self-Care for Diabetes. It's an online program and group support program I'm doing with Rebecca Scritchfield. We're coming close to getting that launched. And if you want to hear about that, we'll put the link in the show notes. You can also email me at glenys@daretronotdiet.com. And, I'll put you on a list to make sure you're one of the first people to hear about it once it's launched. But I'm super excited about that because people really need health at every size informed care for diabetes. And this is going to be comprehensive. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. Can I give one more plug too?
Yes.
Okay. I have a new job at Center for Discovery. So I won't be seeing clients there in their PHP and IOP location. I was in the Woodland Hills location. And instead I'm doing a little bit more sort of global work for them. We don't know the exact title, but like director or advisor for health at every size for Center for Discovery as a whole. So really implementing this philosophy throughout the residential program, throughout all of the PHP and IOPs across the country, and even going deeper into some of the other mental health applications that Discovery Behavioral Health is doing. So it's a big sort of change in what I'm going to be doing for them, and I'm really thankful that they are leading the way and trying to make sure that health at every size is applied throughout their work in treating eating disorders, not just in the binge eating disorder program that we have.
Yeah, that's amazing. And congratulations on that.
Thank you. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I think it's so important for eating disorder treatments to embrace health at every size. And I'm amazed when, I'll occasionally hear of a program and they don't know anything about it. And, or they know a little bit about it, but not a lot. And I'm always interested in that because it's, I just think it's just the best way to treat eating disorders, right? That philosophy, using that philosophy. So I'm so happy you're doing that.
Yeah. It's exciting stuff.
And and my last plug is I am full-time private practice now. So I have a few more spaces in my private practice for some folks who want to do some one-on-one work with healing their relationship to eating and their bodies. And I'm super excited. So we both have awesome new starts to our decade.
Yeah. And I still have my private practice, right? I'm still doing both. But we're each doing a lot of new stuff, which is great. Yeah.
And we've all been we've been able to realize this through Health at Every Size, and I'm so excited that so happy that I found that early on in my journey, and just really satisfying career. So, and I love working with people that are struggling, and it's just I'm sure you find it to be really satisfying too.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So now that we're done plugging ourselves, let's roll the interview with Christie Harrison, author of the book Anti-Diet and host of the podcast Food Psych. I think you're going to love this one.
Christie, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. It's so amazing to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here, and I love this podcast. So really happy to talk with you.
Yeah, well, we love your show, and it's like, the gold standard in Health at Every Size podcast. So, we all listen, and I know many of our listeners are also listening to your show. So they're super excited to hear from you and really talk about this amazing book that you've just published. So let's just sort of dive in. We'd love to hear how you came to this work. How did your training as a dietitian sort of lead you to start a podcast? How did you learn about Health at Every Size? And how did it start? How did it help you create this book that everyone needs to go out and buy immediately?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, like so many of us, I think coming to this health at every size world, my path was very winding. And, I've very much started out steeped in diet culture, like pretty much all of us in the health and wellness field. So, kind of a little backstory about my background is that I've always lived in a smaller body, had thin privilege, was one of those rare unicorns that managed to be an intuitive eater for the first 20 years of my life because, having thin privilege means that no one interfered in my relationship with food and my body. No one told me to lose weight or change my eating. And I was allowed to maintain that intuitive relationship with food. Certainly had some body image issues like any teenage girl or increasingly teenage person of any gender growing up in our society. But I didn't do anything about it. I didn't change my eating or try to lose weight. And that all changed when I went to Paris for my junior year abroad and went on a different birth control pill, gained a little bit of weight, and suddenly all the stuff I'd been hearing about weight and food and bodies my whole life kind of came rushing to the fore. And I was like, okay, I have to lose weight. Still in a thinner body, still definitely with all the privileges that being a relatively small person in this society affords, but just having gained a little bit of weight, not fitting into my clothes anymore. That's kind of like all it took. And so I went down a path that became very disordered very quickly, became a disordered eater and, started out with sort of light dieting and tumbled into disordered eating quickly. And so through basically all of my 20s, I was pretty disordered with food, but I was also starting my career as a journalist and decided, sort of seized on food and nutrition reporting as the beat that I wanted to cover because I was obsessed with food because I wasn't eating enough. And also kind of wanted to master this thing that was giving me so much trouble. So I started reporting on food and nutrition. That was my first career. And then in about 2008, 2009, I was working as an editor at Gourmet Magazine, a food, wonderful, venerable old food magazine that is now defunct, and started to hear rumblings that they were going to close the magazine. And so I started to think about what I might want to do that was an alternative to journalism because the field was starting to seem pretty not very stable, and decided to go back to school to get my master's of public health and nutrition and to get my registered dietitian's license. And I was hoping to, write about food and nutrition and also have a private practice, which is what I ultimately did. But very different motivation going in. My motivation going in was like, I'm going to be the next Michael Pollan or the next Marion Nestle. I want to write books about the food system. I want to help end the quote unquote O-word epidemic. I was very bought into all this diet culture thinking about food and nutrition. And of course, my schooling for dietetics and the Masters of Public Health program too, kind of reinforced that in a lot of ways, especially the dietetics program, I think really added to the food rules and the fears about particular foods and the demonization of certain foods. And so I was just in it. But I also had that history and I sort of knew, I was in therapy. I was working on my own relationship with food. And actually early in my grad school tenure, I decided to write a book about emotional eating. This was about 2010, wanted to write a cultural history of emotional eating and started doing the research for that. And that's when I stumbled on the book Intuitive Eating. And I also around the same time was working with a friend on a freelance journalism piece or package about quote unquote childhood O-word, and he was a health at every size advocate and introduced me to the concept of HAES. And so, that discovery of intuitive eating plus having the HAES seed planted was sort of the first little crack in the wall, I would say, of my traditional weight paradigm. But I didn't really do anything with it at the time. And I researched the book proposal on emotional eating, didn't end up finishing that. It was just not, I found a lot of research actually that, some of which I ended up using in this book, Anti-Diet, that I just released. But, I don't think I was quite ready then to sort of put that research into a framework. It was just too paradigm challenging to where I was coming from. And so it was, this cognitive dissonance that I couldn't quite square. So I think that's part of why I walked away from that book proposal. But I was still interested in people's relationships with food and emotional eating and disordered eating. And so that led me to start my podcast and also to start specializing in this area as a newly minted registered dietitian. So I started my podcast in 2013. I started Food Psych and started out by talking to people just about general disordered relationships with food and, how, if they were able to heal, like how they did that. But it was mostly pretty general and mostly talking to people who are kind of in it with diet culture, although I didn't have that framework at the time. But over time, as I talked to more and more people and worked with more and more people in my private practice and did lots of training and went to conferences on eating disorders, I was just exposed again and again to the idea of health at every size and to the idea that diets don't work and that they actively cause harm. And, at a certain point, it just became, I just couldn't look away. I just couldn't ignore it anymore, that HAES really was the framework that I needed to use in my practice to help people heal. And that, when I was in the second season of the podcast at the time when I really started to click into HAES and realized, oh, this is something that, I'm seeing a lot of eating disorder providers around me, my colleagues, the people that I'm working with at treatment centers or coordinating care with, don't really get it and are saying things that are actually very fat phobic and very steeped in the traditional paradigm. And so, I want to create this podcast to help bring the health at every size message to a wider audience and even to health professionals who might not understand this, fellow eating disorder professionals. So that's kind of what caused that shift in the focus of my podcast around end of season 2, start of season 3. And then from there, I just have never looked back. There, it's been getting deeper and deeper into HAES and the fat positive and anti-diet movement. And so that's really what sort of the book was born out of, was my journey and my research in this area and all of these amazing people that I've talked to for the podcast. I now have 222 episodes or something like that by the time this airs. So it's, it really, I've been so steeped now in this anti-diet space that I wanted to put all of that into a book and create a resource for people that, if they don't have time to listen to 200 plus episodes of a podcast, that maybe I can give to people and sort of synthesize my philosophy and research in a more succinct way. And, hopefully help change society and move the needle on dismantling diet culture as well.
That's interesting. You talk about the first book you wanted to write was about emotional eating. And I'm wondering if that is that something you sort of felt that you experienced, or what was prompting you to sort of write a book about that?
Yeah, I totally felt that I experienced that. And actually one of the sort of main, the sort of initial catalyst, I think, for thinking about that was that the magazine I was working for closed, Gourmet folded. And, I always had thought of myself as an emotional eater, unbeknownst to me, because I was still struggling with kind of low-level disordered eating. I wasn't as fully disordered by that point as I had been, but, because I had been working in food magazines for long enough that I think it did force me to shift my relationship with food in a more flexible, open direction. I had started to practice some of the principles of intuitive eating that I had learned growing up without even realizing it. But, so the magazine folded and I was just not hungry. I just didn't want to eat. I think it was, a natural response to grief that for a few days I was just had no appetite. And that was really interesting to me at the time because I thought, wow, I think of myself as an emotional eater. I always tend to eat more in response to stress or, other emotions, but why is it that grief is making me feel like I don't want to eat? And from there, I started, doing research into what is emotional eating? Are there differences in sort of how different emotions affect people's appetites? What is the concept of emotional eating in general? Where did this idea come from? How did we get this concept of emotional eating? Has this always been the case? And so, yeah, from there, I started to kind of get into some of the research on why diets make us why deprivation makes us eat more, and why dieting drives so-called emotional eating in a way that when people are recovered and, not dieting or not restricting and depriving themselves, they actually don't tend to turn to food for comfort as much. And so I was, started to pull that thread really because of my own experience and my own belief that I was an emotional eater. And that persisted even through that research and even into like my probably first couple months of doing the podcast. I have listened back and hear myself say, oh yeah, I'm sort of an emotional eater when I'm talking to some of my early guests. And I think that's just so fascinating because, now in hindsight, I can really see that it wasn't so-called emotional eating at all. It was really restriction driving binging or driving feeling out of control with food. And once that deprivation stopped, the so-called emotional eating episodes also really declined and eventually disappeared.
My question about the book is this, it's really comprehensive and it's got like amazing resources. And I love how you weave in personal narratives with a lot of data and a lot of research and how you've put it all together. So I have two questions. One is, as you were presenting this topic to a publisher, what was that pushback like for you as in writing this and staying true to this message? And second of all, I think the book sort of details just how deep diet culture goes for all of us. And I'm wondering like how that revelation sparked in you as you were writing this book.
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, in terms of the publisher, I feel like I was really, really lucky in that I landed with a publisher who totally got it. And, I think that maybe there was some pushback when we were shopping the proposal around before even landing a publisher, in the sense that a lot of publishers weren't interested and they passed, But the ones that were interested, the one that I ended up going with, Little Brown, just so understood it and so got it. And, the meeting I was in was with all women and all, feminists and who really understood the sort of patriarchal nature of diet culture and the pressures that are disproportionately placed on women and other marginalized people of color, people with disabilities, trans people, gay people, et cetera. So I think it was just such a pleasant surprise. And I actually say in the acknowledgments of my book that like in our pitch meeting, I kind of like left my body for a second and did a little happy dance in my head because I was like, oh my God, they get it. It's amazing. And it was really that way all the way through. My editor was so on board and so got it. And asked me questions in the editing process that certainly, it was so cute the way she framed it. She was like, I know some of my questions and edits are probably still coming from a diet culture place, and I'm sorry about that. I hope that's okay. But, I hope that will help answer questions that readers will have when reading this book. And so, she definitely had some queries that were coming from that place of like, well, I thought the so-called obesity epidemic was responsible for X, Y, and Z. Can you address this here? And so just was helpful in sort of helping me head off arguments at the pass or, incorporate more information that was going to push back against common diet culture arguments. But I didn't feel pushback. It didn't feel like the pushback was coming from her, if that makes sense. It was sort of coming from let's make this book the strongest it can possibly be against these arguments that we know people will have, but I'm fully on board. And that was true of everyone who worked on the book too. The copy editor was like, I'm a total convert to your cause. It was the lawyer, all these people who had, some little, way of touching the book along the way through my publisher, really got it and were really excited about it. So that was super cool to experience. And I feel very fortunate in that. And I also feel like I listened to my intuition in picking them, I think it was partly that, it just was such an obvious great fit that even if maybe I could have gotten more money somewhere else or whatever, that, I went with a team that I knew was going to do it justice, and they really did. So that was amazing.
I would think it's actually useful to have people that are sort of coming from diet culture to sort of, like you said, ask these questions so that you can head them off at the pass and say, because what we want is for people who are coming from diet culture, maybe you've never heard this message, to read your book. And exactly. So I thought what you did in the book was, just such a great, to me, you didn't have to have any prior knowledge of health at every size to read this book. You could come in just being completely steeped in diet culture and then really understand why it's so horrible for us. So that combination of your team must have really worked for that to that end, I think. Yeah.
It did. And that's what I wanted to do with the book too, was like to have this be a resource that people could have no prior knowledge of intuitive eating or health at every size or anti-diet stuff and read this and come away with a different understanding and come away with, even if they're not entirely quote unquote cured of diet culture, because that's a long process, at least, give them the tools and the framework to do that work and continue unraveling diet culture's hold on them as they go forward.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You were saying that they really were able to jump on this and not give you a ton of pushback on the topic. And I've just been noticing as a complete sidebar here, but there's something happening in the publishing world where this message is getting out there, because I read a ton of fiction. That's my thing. I like to relax with fiction. And there's been at least 2 novels that I've read in the last 2 years that have mentioned either health at every size, or the last one I read was a book by Leanne Moriarty. And then the other one I just finished called Middle Game by Shannon McGuire. She has a character in it. She's not in it for very long, but she talks about, this character has given up dieting, is just trying to learn how to be fat and happy. And I was like, what am I reading? What is this? And I looked up the author. She's in a larger body. I wanted to sort of go down that rabbit hole, but I just thought, okay, well, I don't need to. But this is really exciting that this stuff is showing up. Not just in nonfiction, or not just in nonfiction, but also in fiction. And it's super exciting. So kudos to the publishing world for
Seriously
embracing this little tiny message that we have, right?
So cool.
So what are some ideas for how we can change? And I know you fully address this in your book, and everybody needs to go get it. Multiple copies, go buy it. But what are some ideas for how we, can change from a diet culture to just a more health-giving culture?
Yeah, such a good question. And I really do kind of, elucidate that more in the book. But I think some of the keys are just taking the pressure off of people to lose weight and shrink their bodies, and I think this goes for health professionals, dietitians especially, and other, medical doctors and other healthcare providers who might recommend weight loss, is just to take that out of the equation, because, it really is, that pressure to lose weight really is so detrimental to people's health. And I go into lots of research on why that is in the book, and the clinical effects of weight stigma on people's well-being, the psychological and emotional effects as well. The cultural effects of weight stigma. It's really, really harmful to be stigmatizing larger bodies and telling people to lose weight. And even if doctors or dietitians or other healthcare professionals are saying it in a kind and gentle way, like telling people to lose weight without the quote unquote, without the shame, research actually shows that telling people to lose weight at all, or telling people that there's something wrong with larger bodies and that they're at a greater health risk, actually does increase weight stigma. And that's been shown in experimental settings too. So it literally causes weight stigma to tell people that there's something negative about being in a larger body, even if it's very subtle, or even if it's seemingly just very clinical and not, bringing a lot of negative emotions to the table. It's still harmful to people, and it still does real harm. So I think that we need to just take weight loss off the table completely. I think that would be a huge step towards creating, an anti-diet world, a world free from diet culture. And of course, diet culture is why we tell people to lose weight in the first place, right? Because diet culture is a belief system. I always say it's a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it with health and moral virtue, promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, demonizes some foods while elevating others, and oppresses people who don't match up with its supposed picture of health and well-being. So, that system of beliefs is so ingrained in all of us. It was so ingrained in me. It was why I tried to lose weight myself, and why I practiced from the conventional weight paradigm when I first started working as a dietitian. And I know so many other dietitians do as well. So, I think it's hard to get that out of your head, and it's hard to, truly believe that not offering weight loss is going to be health promoting. But I think if you can just, push pause at least on your weight loss recommendations to clients and start working instead on other health promoting behaviors that have nothing to do with weight. So, helping people click back into intuitive eating and, break up with the food rules, break free from diet culture's restrictions they placed on people that can lead to people binging or feeling out of control with food, helping people get back to having more variety and pleasure in their menu, helping people have better self-care in all kinds of other areas of life too, having and getting enough sleep, taking breaks, having a good work-life balance, getting out and moving your body if it's something that is appropriate for the client in that particular phase of life. And I say that, I say appropriate because for a lot of people in diet culture, compulsive exercise is part of their disorder. And so actually taking a break from movement is the best response for those folks. But, for depending on where people are in their path, for some people, moving your body in a joyful way is appropriate and is something that, can be done without falling back into diet culture. So kind of, getting to know your clients in terms of where they're at in their recovery from diet culture and finding the things that they need to be working on that are going to support their health that have nothing to do with their weight, and just completely taking weight loss off the table, which isn't to say never talking about weight loss with your clients, because if they come to you saying, I want to lose weight, you're not just being like, la, 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 changing the subject. You can talk with them about what that need and desire is about for them, where that comes from, what they think they're going to get when they, if they are to accomplish weight loss. You can also share with them the statistics on why diets don't work and actually cause long-term risk to your health, and why, staying the same weight has actually been shown to be more beneficial in terms of many, many different health outcomes. And so, really talking through the reasons why people are seeking weight loss without co-signing the desire for weight loss, without recommending weight loss, without applauding weight loss if it does occur.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're also talking about is for providers is engaging in the same leap of faith that our clients are going through as they work on this also, right? It's a huge leap of faith as a clinician to say, yeah, I'm not going to make this recommendation anymore because it does harm. And as you're starting to do that, it's like, I don't quite know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Right. But the client's experiencing the same thing when they're just extracting themselves from diet culture. They're like, I don't know what's going to happen next. And so it's like really embracing that vulnerability on a clinician side as well.
Yeah, it's a huge leap of faith. And that's so true that, we're all really vulnerable, I think, when we start rejecting diet culture and embracing this new paradigm, because we don't know what's going to happen. And we've been told from the get-go, from day one, basically, that, if you eat less and move more, if you do certain things, you're going to lose weight, or your clients are going to lose weight, and then they're going to be healthier by virtue of having lost weight, and the end, right? And I think just, recognizing that doesn't happen for the vast majority of people, that, what we're told is going to happen in diet culture is often wildly different and opposite to what really does happen for people, that, most people who do embark on a weight loss effort end up regaining all the weight they lost within 5 years, if not more. And in fact, the majority regain more. And so, if you can sort of keep that in mind and recognize that the way we've been doing things has been doing harm and has been doing the exact opposite of what it tells us it's going to do, right? The traditional weight paradigm tends to result in long-term weight gain and worse health, not by virtue of the weight gain, but just by virtue of weight cycling actually has independent negative, is an independent risk factor for health, regardless of body size. So, we know that the traditional paradigm has been doing harm. I think that helps sort of reinforce the decision to make the change, even though it is a leap of faith, and even though it is scary to see like what's going to happen and what is on the other side of this leap. We can keep in mind that the way we've been doing things thus far has been doing real harm. And, part of the reason I have so many footnotes in the book is because I want to really document that and help healthcare providers or anyone who's science-minded, really understand that research and have that at their fingertips so that they can argue back with, anyone who might be pushing weight loss on them.
That was something I really appreciated about the book, is that it's so well footnoted, right? Like you have really just put all the research in there. And I would say, like, if you're somebody out there comparing, like, oh, should I buy the latest diet book or this book that says anti-diet? Take a look at diet books to show, like, what proof are they showing, right? To say that that this actually works. It's almost none.
Right.
And this has always been my frustration is that, I think a lot of the books in the health at every size world are just so well referenced and researched. And, it's just diet culture is so data resistant, it seems. But I still think it's important that, that research is there. And so I really appreciate all the work that you did in that to note all your references.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a lot of work, but I had some good research help as well with some, research assistants and just a long list of references I'd been compiling over the years. And so, yeah, the fact that it kind of took 10 years to ultimately write a book about, in this general area, I think was really helpful, and that I could just be amassing research through that time. But yeah, diet books, it's such a great point. Diet books do not have the scientific research behind them and the long-term, outcomes that the health at every size approach does. And, just the long-term, the evidence of long-term harm from diets or the evidence of long-term ineffectiveness, I think is so airtight versus, diet books or diet, whatever diet plan out there will reference like, oh, there's science behind this. Check this out. And it's like, 12 male participants over a 6-week period, follow-up of a year, whatever. Like, it's not long-term data, it's not versus the health at every size approach. I think the real foundation is based on the fact that we know diets are not effective over a 5-year or greater period. Only, 2 to 5% of people end up losing weight and keeping it off for longer than 5 years. And the vast majority regain more, all or more than they lost within that time. So, I think it's just really important for anyone who's looking at the research on other diets or on diets in general to say, like, what is the long-term data here? What does that show? How long were your studies? How long did you follow these people up? How long was the program? What other diets did they go on after the program ended that, the results might be getting skewed because of this?
Yeah. It's the lack of long-term research that diets tend to, I think, where it's like, oh no, our diet totally worked. Look, like you said, 6 weeks. Or like 6 weeks. Like, who's on a diet for 6 weeks?
Right.
Well, a lot of people probably give up at week 6, or it's like, this is hell. But it's nobody's saying like what happens after the after. Right? Like, oh, after the after picture. And then but then there's after. So let's look at 5 years or let's look at 10 years. And that's just a total lack of that for the diet industry.
Yeah. You talk a lot about in the book about this honeymoon stage of eating. And, some folks have a hard time with that concept. But they also need to let that pendulum swing once they sort of have been in diet culture for a long time and sort of liberalize their good versus bad thinking around food. And so what do you say to folks when they are struggling there and really sort of questioning, God, should I be doing this? Like, I'm having a hard time, in the moment of this honeymoon eating phase. How do you help keep them sort of moving forward instead of going back to diet culture, which so many people sort of instinctively almost want to do?
I know, totally. It's really hard. And I think, just framing it as a pendulum swing, I think is really helpful for a lot of people to understand what's going on. I have this metaphor in the book of the restriction pendulum, and also the honeymoon phase is kind of, it's that for particular types of food. And it really is this, this pendulum swing from getting pulled over to the side of restriction or pulled over to the side of not eating particular foods to, eventually the pendulum's going to have to swing the opposite way, I think with equal and opposite force, if I'm remembering physics correctly, so it's gonna swing back the other way, and then eventually sort of swing smaller and smaller until it rests in the middle. So you really can't expect to go from dieting and restricting and having all kinds of foods off limits to just a peaceful relationship with all foods where everything is allowed, but you're not freaking out about it and feeling out of control about it. You sort of go. I think it's pretty inevitable. I mean, not everybody has this experience of the honeymoon phase, but I think most people that I've seen do, where they have to test the limits, and test, is it really available? Am I really not going to have this made off limits again? Really? You mean I can eat X, Y, and Z foods anytime I want? Okay, let's find out. Let me eat X, Y, and Z foods nonstop and see if my brain, stops me and puts me on another diet. So I think, rebuilding that trust between body and brain and kind of reconnecting yourself with your own intuition requires some of that testing and some of that rebellion sometimes before you can really get to a place where you're not rebelling against the rules anymore, because that's still being governed by the rules to some extent, but actually acting out of your own autonomy and your own desires and, self-care and all that without taking the rules into account. And that's kind of like a longer term thing. I actually used this metaphor on my podcast recently in answer to a listener question, but they were asking about a similar thing about this honeymoon phase and, how to know if they truly wanted something or if they were just eating in a rebellious way because they could, and, kind of worrying about whether they were doing it right for that reason. And I was like, there's really no doing it right or wrong in intuitive eating. First of all, it's a process, right? And it's a destination, it's a journey, not a destination. But also I think with this, rebellion against food rules, you really have to go through that rebellious phase. And I gave this metaphor of my curfew when I was a kid, when I was a teenager and was first driving. My parents gave me like a 12:30 curfew, which was pretty generous by definition of, some other people I know now. But at the time, most of my friends didn't have curfews, or if they did, it was like a case-by-case basis. It wasn't this hard and fast thing every time. And my dad was really strict about it. And if I was home 5 minutes late, he'd be like pacing back and forth and give me kind of a mini lecture, like passive-aggressive grunting. And, later and later I got, the more of a lecture I got, the more grounded I got. And so, I really tested those limits because sometimes I wanted to stay out later than 12:30. And also because that limit was there, I always wanted to stay out later than 12:30. I wanted to just, see if I could get away with it. And then when I turned 18 and I moved out of the house and went to college, I still was reacting to that restriction. I was still reacting to that curfew. And so stayed out well past 12:30 all the time, stayed out really late and, partied a lot just because I could. But then eventually, after a couple of years, I think I settled into a place where I could start to notice oh, I'm actually getting tired and I actually don't feel like being out anymore. Or I'm actually feeling, I'm feeling really good and I do want to stay out. But it wasn't a particular time. It kind of varied all over the map, whether or not I would be tired at, 10 p.m. and ready to go home or stay out until 4 a.m. or anywhere in between. It started to be driven by my own feelings, how my body felt and my own desires, my own instincts about whether I wanted to stay out or go home. And, so that's something that you can experience with food too, once you get away from those rules and once you allow yourself to go through that rebellious place, which I think is pretty necessary. Finally, you do get to a place where you can make those choices for yourself based on how you feel in your body and what your desires are without reacting to that external voice and those external rules imposed by an authority figure, in this case, diet culture.
Yeah. And I think too, one of the reasons that people get really upset about this idea of trying out all their honeymoon, going through this honeymoon phase and trying out all their forbidden foods is that they think it's causing weight gain. Mm-hmm. My thought is, just because from my clinical experience and what we know about weight regain after diets, is that I think that weight regain is going to happen regardless of what types of foods the person is eating. Mm-hmm. I've seen people regain weight, once they just started eating again, and it wasn't even any of their forbidden foods, right? And so, what is your experience with this, or what would you say to somebody who's like, I can't eat these foods because I'm going to gain weight?
Yeah, it really is true that weight regain after dieting is going to happen no matter what for the vast, vast, vast majority of people, right? For 98% of us, that's what it's going to look like. When you give up dieting, you're going to regain any weight that you lost on diets. And that's a natural part of the process of your body starting to trust you again, because when you're weight suppressed, your body isn't able to trust you. And that's why you feel out of control with particular foods or with food in general. And so, you really do have to go through that place of letting your body get back to a weight that it's comfortable at. And yeah, it's true that no matter what you eat during that time, you're going to regain weight because that's what your body needs to do in order to feel safe, in order to get back to a place of security and stability and not feeling like it's in a famine. And it just so happens that, early in the diet recovery process, we tend to be like, woohoo, I can eat all these foods. And so we're gravitating towards those previously forbidden foods. And I think it's easy to misattribute the weight gain that's happening to that. And of course, diet culture has conditioned us to think also that those particular foods cause weight gain. But, it really is true that no matter what you ate, you would need to be regaining that weight anyway. And so let's not demonize those foods. And, also getting to the root of why people fear weight gain, I think is another huge important piece of recovery, right? Because that belief comes from diet culture, and that belief is fat phobia in action. And so, being able to push back against that internalized fat phobia and learn not to fear weight gain or fear being in a larger body, and, learning how to be resilient to that internalized weight stigma that comes up is super important and a totally ongoing process, and not something that's just one and done, but I think a really important part of making peace with food as well.
Yeah, thank you for sort of explaining that, because that is often what I'm saying to my clients is if you're gaining weight on, brown rice and vegetables, that's, your body will gain weight no matter what after restriction.
Mm-hmm.
So you might as well have some food you like.
Agreed.
So we thought we would ask you this fun question. So we got tons of nice reviews, and I don't think we have any really bad reviews on Apple Podcasts. So I'm really happy about that. And thank you everybody for sending those in. But I found one that I thought was so interesting. And I just wanted to sort of bring this up with you and talk with you about it, about sort of the use of the word fat. So I'll read the review that somebody left, and then we can sort of talk a little bit about it. So it starts out, I have enjoyed the episodes I've listened to, but I would strongly encourage Glenys to quit using the F word, meaning fat. The first time I was shocked, but then it occurred in other episodes. Try larger or smaller bodies instead. And I also thought it was really funny that I was the one being called out for using the fat word. The word fat. And because I know I'm not the only one using the word fat on the show. But anyway, maybe this person just needs to listen to more episodes and see why we use it. But so the way that Aaron and I talk about, and when we use the word fat, we're using it simply as a neutral description of a body size. And the way I see it is I don't want fat to be the Voldemort of words for body description, right? We can say thin and nobody gets upset, but why should we get upset when we say fat? It's just, a description of a body size, and I see it as a very neutral one, especially since I also happen to be kind of fat. So we just wondered if you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so many thoughts. I mean, I agree with you that fat is a neutral description that should not have the stigma that it carries in diet culture. And the reason that it does have that stigma is because of diet culture, is because of this fat phobic belief system that we live in that says, fat is something undesirable or something to be avoided. And, being fat is equated to all these negative things that diet culture tells us it is, that aren't really true. And so I think it's understandable that people have those sort of negative associations with the word. And so I think that using it in a neutral way and reclaiming it as a neutral descriptor is a huge part of challenging diet culture and pushing back against it. And I love it when people, self-identify as fat and use it in that reclaimed way. And I totally co-sign that. And I'm on board saying fat with people who use it in that way. I have found that for myself, as someone in a smaller body doing this work, it gets really tricky if I use it in this, neutral, reclaimed way without a lot of explanation around it. And I feel like if I had to spend every time I use that word, explain why I'm using it and get into the nuances and the politics of it, I would be so derailed from my original point that I often will just use the term like in a larger body instead, or higher weight, or another, those are other like neutral descriptions of body size that don't have baggage with them. And that I've found that some people just are super triggered by hearing a smaller bodied person use the word fat, because that word has been used to criticize them in the past by smaller bodied people. And that's just bringing up a lot of trauma. And so I try to respect kind of where people are at in their process and use whatever word they feel comfortable using. And, so with that, in sort of public work that I do, like my podcast or my book, I tend to just default to like higher weight or larger bodied or whatever when describing body size, unless someone is specifically using it in that reclaimed way. And then I'll use it with them. I'll use it in the spirit of fat acceptance along with that person. But if I'm sitting here like lobbing that word around, I just feel like people can have these really negative reactions to it that speak a lot more to like where they're at in their recovery from diet culture and weight stigma than anything to do with the word itself. But I'd rather, sort of try to be more inclusive of everyone by using larger bodied or whatever when I'm not someone who can, I can't reclaim the word for myself. Versus if I could, if I was fat, if I was a self-identified fat person, fat activist, I think I would want to use that word all the time and use it to challenge those assumptions and use it to break down that stigma and, maybe explain it whenever someone had a reaction to it. But I think it may be similar to like the word queer in gay culture, where, some people use it in this reclaimed way and feel, proud to use it that way. And then someone who's, hetero coming in from outside using the word queer to the wrong person might feel really derogatory. And so kind of just, navigating the nuance of that depending on who you're talking to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I sort of appreciate the sensitivity around that for, somebody in a smaller body. Not, as you said, lobbing the word around. And my goal is always to sort of destigmatize the word.
Yeah. What's interesting is that they called out Glenys for this, right? When I use the word also, and I identify as fat, and I live in a fat body, and I want to use the word also. And so as that in that activist sort of realm, and I think it's really interesting because this is not the first time since we've been doing our show that, how I use language is perceived a little bit differently, or actually not a lot differently than how Glenys would use language. And we use the same words, and they land differently. And I think it just highlights, the patriarchal system that we're navigating in addition to the weight stigma that we're also trying to navigate through.
Yeah, so fascinating. It's really interesting that you two have that lens on things because you have, a male and a female co-host. Whereas like my experience with, reviews and negative feedback and stuff is just from my perspective as a female host. And I definitely also feel like my language gets critiqued and policed a lot, maybe more than a male host would. So it's really fascinating to think about that sort of patriarchal element too.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, I'm not going to stop using the word fat. I like the word fat. I like pointing to my fat belly and saying, it's just fat, everybody. Relax. And shocking everybody in a room that I've said the F word. So, I think sometimes there's a real usefulness to it. And as you said, I don't use it with clients who are sort of new to this work unless they are themselves like working on using that word or they like it or whatever. So, it's really more as when I'm using it, so people know it is a neutral description of a body size. I do also use larger body or smaller body or higher weight bodies. I use all of those just depending on the context of the conversation, which is the beauty of, the English language, is that we have so many words to describe different things.
Yeah, it would be so boring if it was just the same word all the time. And,
Right.
And I feel like, you using it in that reclaimed way and that political way is so important and like so challenging to the status quo. And I think that's awesome.
Thank you. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to keep doing it.
As approved, Christy Harrison.
Yeah. Approved.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm stamping my approval.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on our show, and congratulations on this book. We know how hard you worked on it and for how long you worked on it. And in addition, I think, thank the publisher, right, for taking the leap to get this word out. I think you deserve a lot of praise and all of the accolades that hopefully will come with this book, because you've really put in a lot of effort to do this, and we're really appreciative of all of that.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. And I definitely give so much credit to the publisher for taking this leap of faith on my book when, they publish diet books normally. And it's pretty cool to be sitting there on the shelf in their offices with, these books that my book is really critiquing. And so I'm grateful for that leap of faith and so grateful for your support and for both of you being in the book too. I love having.
Oh my God. Highlight of a lifetime. Total highlight. Thank you so much. And my name is above Gwyneth Paltrow's in the index. I went right there, found it, was like so excited. Take that, Gwyneth.
That's amazing.
I'm sharing real estate with Gwyneth. So, and we'll definitely put the link to the book, the Amazon link to the book in the show notes. And then where can people find you? Where's the easiest place for people to find you and what's going on with you?
Yeah, so the easiest place is probably my website, ChristieHarrison.com. There you can find links to the book and like the audiobook and, all different booksellers. Also, my podcast is there and just more information about me and all the work that I do. So come on over, ChristieHarrison.com.
It's a small little itty bitty podcast, only a couple hundred episodes.
Yeah, giving us complete professional envy every time we release an episode, but that's fine. Because you do all the work. And we can, Christy Harrison did a podcast on that. Go on over and listen to it. So we are so grateful for the resource that you provide. And I have so many clients that have found health at every size through your podcast, and you're going to inspire more people with this book, Anti-Diet. And so I hope everybody goes out, buys it for their aunts and their moms and their uncles and their everybody, their doctors.
Yes, the doctors.
Everybody to sort of, foment revolution, anti-diet revolution. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.